Chapter 17. Solomon's Treasure Chamber. While we were engaged in recovering from our fright, and in examining the grisly wonders of the place of death, Gagool had been differently occupied. Somehow or other, for she was marvellously active when she chose, she had scrambled onto the great table, and made her way to where our departed friend Twala was placed, under the drip. To see suggested good how he was pickling, or for some dark purpose of her own. Then, after bending down to kiss his icy lips as though in affectionate greeting, she hobbled back, stopping now and again to address the remark, the tenor of which I could not catch, to one or other of the shrouded forms, just as you or I might welcome an old acquaintance. Having gone through this mysterious and horrible ceremony, she squatted herself down on the table immediately under the White Death, and began, so far as I could make out, to offer up prayers. The spectacle of this wicked creature pouring out supplications, evil ones no doubt, to the arch-enemy of mankind, was so uncanny that it caused us to hasten our inspection. "Now, Gagool," said I, in a low voice, somehow one did not dare to speak above a whisper in that place, "lead us to the chamber." The old witch promptly scrambled down from the table. "My lords are not afraid?" she said, leering up into my face. "Lead on." "Good, my lords," and she hobbled round to the back of the Great Death. "Here is the chamber. Let my lords light the lamp and enter." And she placed the gourd full of oil upon the floor, and leaned herself against the side of the cave. I took out a match, of which we still had a few in a box, and lit a rush wick, and then looked for the doorway, but there was nothing before us except the solid rock. Gagool grinned. "The way is there, my lords. Ha ha ha!" "Do not jest with us," I said sternly. "I jest not, my lords. See!" and she pointed at the rock. As she did so, on holding up the lamp, we perceived that a mass of stone was rising slowly from the floor and vanishing into the rock above, where doubtless there is a good cavity prepared to receive it. The mass was of the width of a good-sized door, about 10 feet high and not less than 5 feet thick. It must have weighed at least 20 or 30 tons, and was clearly moved upon some simple balance principle of counterweights, probably the same as that by which the opening and shutting of an ordinary modern window is arranged. How the principle was set in motion, of course none of us saw. Gagool was careful to avoid this, but I have little doubt that there was some very simple lever, which was moved ever so little by pressure at a secret spot, thereby throwing additional weight onto the hidden counterbalances and causing the monolith to be lifted from the ground. Very slowly and gently the great stone raised itself, till at last it had vanished altogether, and a dark hole presented itself to us in the place which the door had filled. Our excitement was so intense, as we saw the way to Solomon's treasure chamber thrown open at last, that I for one began to tremble and shake. Would it prove a hoax after all, I wondered, or was old Da Silvestra right? Were there vast hoards of wealth hidden in that dark place, hoards which would make us the richest men in the whole world? We should know in a minute or two. "Enter, white men from the stars," said Gagool, advancing into the doorway. "But first hear your servant, Gagool the Old. The bright stones that ye will see were dug out of the pit over which the Silent Ones are set, and stored here, I know not by whom, for that was done longer ago than even I remember. But once has this place been entered since the time that those who hid the stones departed in haste, leaving them behind. The report of the treasure went down indeed among the people who lived in the country from age to age, but none knew where the chamber was, nor the secret of the door. But it happened that a white man reached this country from over the mountains. Perchance he too came from the stars, and was well received by the king of that day. He it is who sits yonder," and she pointed to the fifth king at the table of the dead. "And it came to pass that he and a woman of the country who was with him journeyed to this place, and that by chance the woman learnt the secret of the door. 1,000 years might ye search, but ye should never find that secret. Then the white man entered with the woman, and found the stones, and filled with stones the skin of a small goat, which the woman had with her to hold food. And as he was going from the chamber, he took up one more stone, a large one, and held it in his hand." Here she paused. "Well," I asked, breathless with interest, as we all were, "what happened to Da Silvestra?" The old hag started at the mention of his name. "How knowest thou the dead man's name?" she asked sharply, and then, without waiting for an answer, went on. "None can tell what happened, but it came about that the white man was frightened, for he flung down the goat-skin with the stones, and fled out with only the one stone in his hand. And that the king took, and it is the stone which thou, Macumazahn, didst take from Twala's brow." "Have none entered here since?" I asked, peering again down the dark passage. "None, my lords. Only the secret of the door has been kept, and every king has opened it, though he has not entered. There is a saying that those who enter there will die within a moon, even as the white man died in the cave upon the mountain where ye found him, Macumazahn, and therefore the kings do not enter." "Ha, ha! Mine are true words." Our eyes met as she said it, and I turned sick and cold. How did the old hag know all these things? "Enter, my lords. If I speak truth, the goat-skin with the stones will lie upon the floor, and if there is truth as to whether it is death to enter here, that ye will learn afterwards. Ha, ha, ha!" And she hobbled through the doorway, bearing the light with her, but I confess that once more I hesitated about following. "Oh, confound it all," said Good. "Here goes. I am not going to be frightened by that old devil." And followed by Foulata, who, however, evidently did not at all like the business, for she was shivering with fear, he plunged into the passage after Gagool, an example which we quickly followed. A few yards down the passage, in the narrow way hewn out of the living rock, Gagool had paused and was waiting for us. "See, my lords," she said, holding the light before her. "Those who stored the treasure here fled in haste, and bethought them to guard against any who should find the secret of the door, but had not the time." And she pointed to the large square blocks of stone, which, to the height of 2 courses, about 2 feet 3, had been placed across the passage with a view to walling it up. Along the side of the passage were similar blocks ready for use, and, most curious of all, a heap of mortar and a couple of trowels, which tools, so far as we had time to examine them, appeared to be of a similar shape and make to those used by workmen to this day. Here Foulata, who had been in a state of great fear and agitation throughout, said that she felt faint and could go no farther, but would wait there. Accordingly we sat her down on the unfinished wall, placing the basket of provisions by her side, and left her to recover. Following the passage for about 15 paces farther, we came suddenly to an elaborately painted wooden door. It was standing wide open. Whoever was last there had either not found the time to shut it, or had forgotten to do so. Across the threshold of this door lay a skin bag, formed of a goat skin, that appeared to be full of pebbles. "Hee hee, white men!" sniggered Gagool, as the light from the lamp fell upon it. "What did I tell you, that the white man who came here fled in haste, and dropped the woman's bag? Behold it! Look within also, and ye will find a water gourd amongst the stones." Good stooped down and lifted it. It was heavy and jingled. "By Jove, I believe it's full of diamonds," he said, in an awed whisper. And indeed, the idea of a small goat skin full of diamonds is enough to awe anybody. "Go on," said Sir Henry impatiently. "Here, old lady, give me the lamp." And taking it from Gagool's hand, he stepped through the doorway and held it high above his head. We pressed in after him, forgetful for the moment of the bag of diamonds, and found ourselves in King Solomon's treasure chamber. At first, all that the somewhat faint light given by the lamp revealed was a room hewn out of the living rock, and apparently not more than 10 feet square. Next there came into sight, stored one on the other to the arch of the roof, a splendid collection of elephant tusks. How many of them there were we did not know, for of course we could not see to what depth they went, but there could not have been less than the ends of 400 or 500 tusks of the first quality, visible to our eyes. There alone was enough ivory to make a man wealthy for life. Perhaps, I thought, it was from this very store that Solomon drew the raw material for his great throne of ivory, of which there was not the like made in any kingdom. On the opposite side of the chamber were about a score of wooden boxes, something like Martini Henry ammunition boxes, only rather larger and painted red. "There are the diamonds," cried I. "Bring the light." Sir Henry did so, holding it close to the top box, of which the lid, rendered rotten by time even in that dry place, appeared to have been smashed in, probably by da Silvestra himself. Pushing my hand through the hole in the lid, I drew it out full, not of diamonds, but of gold pieces, of a shape that none of us had seen before, and with what looked like Hebrew characters stamped upon them. "Ah," I said, replacing the coin, "we shan't go back empty-handed, anyhow. There must be a couple of 1,000 pieces in each box, and there are 18 boxes. I suppose this was the money to pay the workmen and merchants." "Well," put in Good, "I think that is the lot. I don't see any diamonds, unless the old Portuguese put them all into his bag." "Let my lords look yonder where it is darkest, if they would find the stones," said Gagool, interpreting our looks. "There, my lords, will find a nook, and 3 stone chests in the nook, 2 sealed and 1 open." Before translating this to Sir Henry, who carried the light, I could not resist asking how she knew these things, if no one had entered the place since the white man generations ago. "Ah, Macumazahn, the Watcher by Night," was the mocking answer. "Ye who dwell in the stars, do ye not know that some live long, and that some have eyes which can see through rock? Ha, ha, ha!" "Look in that corner, Curtis," I said, indicating the spot Gagool had pointed out. "Hello, you fellows," he cried. "Here's a recess. Great heavens, see here!" We hurried up to where he was standing in a nook shaped something like a small bow window. Against the wall of this recess were placed 3 stone chests, each about 2 feet square. 2 were fitted with stone lids. The lid of the third rested against the side of the chest, which was open. "See!" he repeated hoarsely, holding the lamp over the open chest. We looked, and for a moment could make nothing out, on account of a silvery sheen which dazzled us. When our eyes grew used to it, we saw that the chest was 3 parts full of uncut diamonds, most of them of considerable size. Stooping, I picked some up. Yes, there was no doubt of it, there was the unmistakable soapy feel about them. I fairly gasped as I dropped them. "We are the richest men in the whole world," I said. "Monte Cristo was a fool to us." "We shall flood the market with diamonds," said Good. "Got to get them there first," suggested Sir Henry. We stood still with pale faces and stared at each other, the lantern in the middle and the glittering gems below, as though we were conspirators about to commit a crime, instead of being, as we thought, the most fortunate men on earth. "Hee, hee, hee!" cackled old Gagool behind us, as she flitted about like a vampire bat. "There are the bright stones ye love, white men. As many as ye will, take them, run them through your fingers, eat of them, drink of them, ha ha!" At that moment there was something so ridiculous to my mind at the idea of eating and drinking diamonds that I began to laugh outrageously, an example which the others followed without knowing why. There we stood and shrieked with laughter over the gems that were ours, which had been found for us thousands of years ago by the patient delvers in the great hole yonder, and stored for us by Solomon's long-dead overseer, whose name, perchance, was written in the characters stamped on the faded wax that yet adhered to the lids of the chest. Solomon never got them, nor David, or da Silvestra, nor anybody else. We had got them. There before us were millions of pounds worth of diamonds, and thousands of pounds worth of gold and ivory only waiting to be taken away. Suddenly the fit passed off, and we stopped laughing. "Open the other chests, white men," croaked Gagool. "There are surely more therein. Take your fill, white lords. Ha ha! Take your fill!" Thus adjured, we set to work to pull up the stone lids on the other 2. First, not without a feeling of sacrilege, breaking the seals that fastened them. Hurrah! They were full too, full to the brim. At least the second one was. No wretched burglarious da Silvestra had been filling goatskins out of that. As for the third chest, it was only about a fourth full, but the stones were all picked ones, none less than 20 carats, and some of them as large as pigeon eggs. A good many of these bigger ones, however, we could see by holding them up to the light, were a little yellow, off-coloured, as they call it at Kimberley. What we did not see, however, was the look of fearful malevolence that old Gagool favoured us with, as she crept like a snake, out of the treasure chamber and down the passage towards the door of solid rock. Hark! Cry upon cry comes ringing up the vaulted path, It is Foulata's voice. "Oh, Bougwan, help! Help! The stone falls!" "Leave go, girl, then." "Help! Help! She has stabbed me!" By now we are running down the passage, and this is what the light from the lamp shows us. The door of the rock is closing down slowly. It is not 3 feet from the floor. Near it struggle Foulata and Gagool. The red blood of the former runs to her knee, but still the brave girl holds the old witch, who fights like a wild cat. Ah, she is free. Foulata falls, and Gagool throws herself on the ground, to twist like a snake through the crack of the closing stone. She is under. Ah, God! Too late! Too late! The stone nips her, and she yells in agony. Down, down it comes, all the 30 tons of it, slowly pressing her old body against the rock below. Shriek upon shriek, such as we have never heard. Then a long, sickening crunch, and the door was shut, just as, rushing down the passage, we hurled ourselves against it. It was all done in 4 seconds. Then we turned to Foulata. The poor girl was stabbed in the body, and I saw that she could not live long. "Ah, Bougwan, I die," gasped the beautiful creature. "She crept out, Gagool. I did not see her. I was faint, and the door began to fall. Then she came back, and was looking up the path. I saw her come in through the slowly falling door, and caught her and held her, and she stabbed me, and I die, Bougwan." "Poor girl, poor girl," Good cried in his distress, and then, as he could do nothing else, he fell to kissing her. "Bougwan," she said after a pause, "is Macumazahn there? It grows so dark I cannot see." "Here I am, Foulata." "Macumazahn, be my tongue for a moment. I pray thee, for Bougwan cannot understand me, and before I go into the darkness I would speak to him a word." "Say on, Foulata, I will render it." "Say to my lord Bougwan that I love him, and that I am glad to die, because I know that he cannot cumber his life with such as I am, for the sun may not mate with the darkness, nor the white with the black. Say that since I saw him, at times I have felt as though there were a bird in my bosom, which would one day fly hence and sing elsewhere. Even now, though I cannot lift my hand, and my brain grows cold, I do not feel as though my heart were dying. It is so full of love that it could live 10,000 years and yet be young. Say that if I live again, mayhap I shall see him in the stars, and that I will search them all, though perchance there I should still be black, and he would still be white. Say, nay, Macumazahn, say no more, save that I love. Oh, hold me closer, Bougwan. I cannot feel thine arms. Chee, chee. She is dead. She is dead, muttered Good, rising in grief, the tears running down his honest face. You need not let that trouble you, old fellow, said Sir Henry. Eh? Exclaimed Good. What do you mean? I mean that you will soon be in a position to join her. Man, don't you see that we are buried alive?" Until Sir Henry uttered these words, I do not think that the full horror of what had happened had come home to us, preoccupied as we were with the sight of poor Foulata's end. But now we understood. The ponderous mass of rock had closed, probably for ever, for the only brain which knew its secret was crushed to powder beneath its weight. This was a door that none could hope to force with anything short of dynamite in large quantities, and we were on the wrong side. For a few minutes we stood horrified, there over the corpse of Foulata. All the manhood seemed to have gone out of us. The first shock of this idea of the slow and miserable end that awaited us was overpowering. We saw it all now. That fiend Gagool had planned this snare for us from the first. It would have been just the jest that her evil mind would have rejoiced in, the idea of the three white men, whom for some reason of her own she had always hated, slowly perishing of thirst and hunger in the company of the treasure they had coveted. Now I saw the point of that sneer of hers about eating and drinking the diamonds. Probably somebody had tried to serve the poor old Dom in the same way, when he abandoned the skin full of jewels. "This will never do," said Sir Henry hoarsely. "The lamp will soon go out. Let us see if we can't find the spring that works the rock." We sprang forward with desperate energy, and standing in a bloody ooze began to feel up and down the door and the sides of the passage, but no knob or spring could we discover. "Depend on it," I said, "it does not work from the inside. If it did, Gagool would not have risked trying to crawl underneath the stone. It was the knowledge of this that made her try to escape at all hazards, curse her." "At all events," said Sir Henry, with a hard little laugh, "retribution was swift. Hers was almost as awful an end as ours is likely to be. We can do nothing with the door. Let us go back to the treasure room." We turned and went, and as we passed it I perceived by the unfinished wall across the passage the basket of food which poor Foulata had carried. I took it up and brought it with me to the accursed treasure chamber that was to be our grave. Then we returned and reverently bore in Foulata's corpse, laying it on the floor by the boxes of coin. Next we seated ourselves, leaning our backs against the 3 stone chests which contained the priceless treasure. "Let us divide the food," said Sir Henry, "so as to make it last as long as possible." Accordingly we did so. It would, we reckoned, make 4 infinitesimally small meals for each of us, enough, say, to support life for a couple of days. Besides the biltong, or dried game flesh, there were 2 gourds of water, each of which held not more than a quart. "Now," said Sir Henry grimly, "let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." We each ate a small portion of the biltong and drank a sip of water. Needless to say, we had but little appetite, though we were sadly in need of food, and felt better after swallowing it. Then we got up and made a systematic examination of the walls of our prison house, in the faint hope of finding some means of exit, sounding them and the floor carefully. There was none. It was not probable that there would be any to a treasure chamber. The lamp began to burn dim. The fat was nearly exhausted. "Quatermain," said Sir Henry, "what is the time? Your watch goes?" I drew it out and looked at it. It was 6 o'clock. We had entered the cave at 11. "Infadoos will miss us," I suggested. "If we do not return tonight, he will search for us in the morning, Curtis." "He may search in vain. He does not know the secret of the door, nor even where it is. No living person knew it yesterday except Gagool. Today no one knows it. Even if he found the door, he could not break it down. All the Kukuana army could not break through 5 feet of living rock. My friends, I see nothing for it but to bow ourselves to the will of the Almighty. The search for treasure has brought many to a bad end. We shall go to swell their number." The lamp grew dimmer yet. Presently it flared up and showed the whole scene in strong relief, the great mass of white tusks, the boxes of gold, the corpse of the poor Foulata stretched before them, the goatskin full of treasure, the dim glimmer of the diamonds, and the wild, wan faces of us 3 white men seated there awaiting death by starvation. Then the flame sank and expired. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. We abandon hope. I can give no adequate description of the horrors of the night which followed. Mercifully, they were to some extent mitigated by sleep, for even in such a position as ours, wearied nature will sometimes assert itself. But I, at any rate, found it impossible to sleep much. Putting aside the terrifying thought of our impending doom, for the bravest man on earth might well quail from such a fate as awaited us, and I never made any pretensions to be brave. The silence itself was too great to allow of it. Reader, you may have lain awake at night and thought the quiet oppressive, but I say with confidence that you can have no idea what a vivid, tangible thing is perfect stillness. On the surface of the earth there is always some sound or motion, and though it may in itself be imperceptible, yet it deadens the sharp edge of absolute silence. But here there was none. We were buried in the bowels of a huge snow-clad peak. Thousands of feet above us the fresh air rushed over the white snow, but no sound of it reached us. We were separated by a long tunnel and 5 feet of rock, even from the awful chamber of the dead, and the dead make no noise. Did we not know it who lay by poor Foulata's side? The crashing of all the artillery of earth and heaven could not have come to our ears in our living tomb. We were cut off from every echo of the world. We were as men already in the grave. Then the irony of the situation forced itself upon me. There around us lay treasures enough to pay off a moderate national debt, or to build a fleet of ironclads, and yet we would have bartered them all gladly for the faintest chance of escape. Soon, doubtless, we would be rejoiced to exchange them for a bite of food or a cup of water, and after that even for the privilege of a speedy close to our sufferings. Truly wealth, which men spend their lives in acquiring, is a valueless thing at the last. And so the night wore on. "Good," said Sir Henry's voice at last, and it sounded awful in the intense stillness. "How many matches have you in the box?" "8, Curtis." "Strike one then, and let us see the time." He did so, and in contrast to the dense darkness the flame nearly blinded us. It was 5 o'clock by my watch. The beautiful dawn was now blushing on the snow wreaths far over our heads, and the breeze would be stirring the night mists in the hollows. "We had better eat something and keep up our strength," I suggested. "What is the good of eating?" answered Good. "The sooner we die and get it over with, the better." "While there is life there is hope," said Sir Henry. Accordingly we ate and sipped some water, and another period of time elapsed. Then Sir Henry suggested that it might be well to get as near the door as possible, and hallo on the faint chance of somebody catching a sound outside. Accordingly Good, who from long practice at sea has a fine piercing note, groped his way down the passage and set to work. I must say that he made a most diabolical noise. I never heard such yells, but it might have been a mosquito buzzing, for all the effect they produced. After a while he gave it up and came back very thirsty and had to drink. Then we stopped yelling, as it encroached on the supply of water. So we sat down once more against the chests of useless diamonds in that dreaded inaction, which was one of the hardest circumstances of our fate, and I am bound to say that, for my part, I gave way in despair. Laying my head against Sir Henry's broad shoulder, I burst into tears, and I think that I heard Good gulping away on the other side, and swearing hoarsely at himself for doing it. Ah, how good and brave that great man was! Had we been two frightened children, and he our nurse, he could not have treated us more tenderly. Forgetting his own share of miseries, he did all he could to soothe our broken nerves, telling stories of men who had been in somewhat similar circumstances and miraculously escaped, and when these failed to cheer us, pointing out how, after all, it was only anticipating an end which must come to us all, that it would soon be over, and that death from exhaustion was a merciful one, which is not true. Then, in a diffident sort of way, as once before I had heard him do, he suggested that we should throw ourselves on the mercy of a higher power, which for my part I did with great vigour. His is a beautiful character, very quiet, but very strong. And so somehow the day went as the night had gone, if indeed one can use these terms when all was densest night, and when I lit a match to see the time, it was 7 o'clock. Once more we ate and drank, and as we did so an idea occurred to me. "How is it," said I, "that the air in this place keeps fresh? It is thick and heavy, but it is perfectly fresh." "Good heavens!" said Good, starting up. "I never thought of that. It can't come through the stone door, for it's airtight, if ever a door was. It must come from somewhere. If there were no current of air in the place, we should have been stifled or poisoned when we first came in. Let us have a look." It was wonderful what a change this mere spark of hope wrought in us. In a moment we were all three groping about on our hands and knees, feeling for the slightest indication of a draught. Presently my ardour received a check. I put my hand on something cold. It was dead Foulata's face. For an hour or more we went on feeling about, till at last Sir Henry and I gave it up in despair, having been considerably hurt by constantly knocking our heads against tusks, chests, and the sides of the chamber. But Good still persevered, saying, with an approach to cheerfulness, that it was better than doing nothing. "I say, you fellows," he said presently, in a constrained sort of voice, "come here." Needless to say, we scrambled towards him quickly enough. "Quatermain, put your hand here where mine is. Now, do you feel anything?" "I think I feel air coming up." "Now listen." He rose and stamped upon the place, and a flame of hope shot up in our hearts. It rang hollow. With trembling hands I lit a match. I had only 3 left, and we saw we were in the angle of the far corner of the chamber, a fact that accounted for our not having noticed the hollow sound of the place during our former exhaustive examination. As the match burnt, we scrutinized the spot. There was a join in the solid rock floor, and, great heavens, there, let in level with the rock, was a stone ring. We said no word, we were too excited, and our hearts beat too wildly with hope to allow us to speak. Good had a knife, at the back of which was one of those hooks that are made to extract stones from horses' hoofs. He opened it and scratched round the ring with it. Finally he worked it under, and levered away gently for fear of breaking the hook. The ring began to move. Being of stone, it had not rusted fast in all the centuries it had lain there, as would have been the case had it been of iron. Presently it was upright. Then he thrust his hands into it and tugged with all his force, but nothing budged. "Let me try," I said impatiently, for the situation of the stone, right in the angle of the corner, was such that it was impossible for 2 to pull at once. I took hold and strained away, but no results. Then Sir Henry tried, and failed. Taking the hook again, Good scratched all around the crack where we felt the air coming up. "Now, Curtis," he said, "tackle on, and put your back into it. You are as strong as 2. Stop," and he took off a stout black silk handkerchief, which, true to his habits of neatness, he still wore, and ran it through the ring. "Quatermain, get Curtis round the middle, and pull for dear life when I give the word. Now!" Sir Henry put out all his enormous strength, and Good and I did the same, with such power as nature had given us. "Heave! Heave! It's giving!" gasped Sir Henry, and I heard the muscles of his great back cracking. Suddenly there was a grating sound, then a rush of air, and we were all on our backs on the floor, with a heavy flagstone upon the top of us. Sir Henry's strength had done it, and never did muscular power stand a man in better stead. "Light a match, Quatermain," he said, so soon as we had picked ourselves up and got our breath. "Carefully now." I did so, and there before us, heaven be praised, was the first step of a stone stair. "Now what is to be done?" asked Good. "Follow the stair, of course, and trust to Providence." "Stop," said Sir Henry. "Quatermain, get the bit of biltong and the water that are left. We may want them." I went, creeping back to our place by the chests for that purpose, and as I was coming away an idea struck me. We had not thought much of the diamonds for the last 24 hours or so. Indeed, the very idea of diamonds was nauseous, seeing what they had entailed upon us. But, reflected I may as well pocket some, just in case we should ever get out of this ghastly hole. So I just put my fist into the first chest and filled all the available pockets of my old shooting coat and trousers, topping up, this was a happy thought, with a few handfuls of big ones from the third chest. Also, by an afterthought, I stuffed Foulata's basket, which, except for one water gourd and a little biltong, was empty now, with great quantities of the stones. "I say, you fellows," I sang out, "won't you take some diamonds with you? I filled my pockets and the basket." "Oh, come on, Quatermain, and hang the diamonds," said Sir Henry. "I hope that I may never see another." As for Good, he made no answer. He was, I think, taking his last farewell of all that was left of the poor girl who had loved him so well. And curiously as it may seem to you, my reader, sitting at home at ease and reflecting on the vast, indeed the immeasurable, wealth which we were thus abandoning, I can assure you that if you had passed some 28 hours with next to nothing to eat and drink in that place, you would not have cared to cumber yourself with diamonds whilst plunging down into the unknown bowels of the earth, in the wild hope of escape from an agonizing death. If from the habits of a lifetime it had not become a sort of second nature with me never to leave anything worth having behind, if there was the slightest chance of my being able to carry it away, I am sure that I should not have bothered to fill my pockets and that basket. "Come on, Quatermain," repeated Sir Henry, who was already standing on the first step of the stone stair. "Steady, I will go first." "Mind where you put your feet. There may be some awful hole underneath," I answered. "Much more likely to be another room," said Sir Henry, while he descended slowly, counting the steps as he went. When he got to 15 he stopped. "Here's the bottom," he said. "Thank goodness, I think it's a passage. Follow me down." Good went next, and I came last, carrying the basket, and on reaching the bottom lit one of the two remaining matches. By its light we could just see that we were standing in a narrow tunnel which ran right and left at right angles to the staircase we had descended. Before we could make out any more, the match burnt my fingers and went out. Then arose the delicate question of which way to go. Of course it was impossible to know what the tunnel was or where it led to, and yet to turn one way might lead us to safety, and the other to destruction. We were utterly perplexed, till suddenly it struck Good that when I had lit the match the draught of the passage blew the flame to the left. "Let us go against the draught," he said. "Air draws inwards, not outwards." We took this suggestion, and feeling along the wall with our hands, whilst trying the ground before us at every step, we departed from that accursed treasure chamber on our terrible quest for life. If ever it should be entered again by living man, which I do not think probable, he will find tokens of our visit in the open chests of jewels, the empty lamp, and the white bones of poor Foulata. When we had groped our way for about a quarter of an hour along the passage, suddenly it took a sharp turn, or else was bisected by another, which we followed, only in course of time to be led into a third, and so it went on for some hours. We seemed to be in a stone labyrinth that led nowhere. What all these passages are, of course, I cannot say, but we thought that they must be the ancient workings of a mine, of which the various shafts and adits travelled hither and thither as the ore led them. This is the only way in which we could account for such a multitude of galleries. At length we halted, thoroughly worn out with fatigue, and with that hope deferred which maketh the heart sick, and ate up our poor remaining piece of biltong, and drank our last sup of water, for our throats were like lime kilns. It seemed to us that we had escaped death in the darkness of the treasure chamber, only to meet him in the darkness of the tunnels. As we stood, once more utterly depressed, I thought that I caught a sound, to which I called the attention of the others. It was very faint and very far off, but it was a sound, a faint murmuring sound, for the others heard it too, and no words can describe the blessedness of it after all those hours of utter awful stillness. "By heavens, it's running water," said Good. "Come on." Off we started again in the direction from which the faint murmur seemed to come, groping our way as before along the rocky walls. I remember that I laid down the basket full of diamonds, wishing to be rid of its weight, but on second thoughts took it up again. One might as well die rich as poor, I reflected. As we went the sound became more and more audible, till at last it seemed quite loud in the quiet. On, yet on. Now we could distinctly make out the unmistakable swirl of rushing water. And yet how could there be running water in the bowels of the earth? Now we were quite near it, and Good, who was leading, swore that he could smell it. "Go gently, Good," said Sir Henry. "We must be close." Splash! And a cry from Good. He had fallen in. "Good, Good, where are you?" we shouted in terrified distress. To our intense relief an answer came back in a choky voice. "All right, I've got hold of a rock. Strike a light to show me where you are." Hastily I lit the last remaining match. Its faint gleam discovered to us a dark mass of water running at our feet. How wide it was we could not see, but there, some way out, was the dark form of our companion hanging on to a projecting rock. "Stand clear to catch me," swung out Good. "I must swim for it." Then we heard a splash and a great struggle. Another minute, and he had grabbed at and caught Sir Henry's outstretched hand, and we had pulled him up high and dry into the tunnel. "My word," he said between his gasps, "that was touch and go. If I hadn't managed to catch that rock and know how to swim, I should have been done. It runs like a mill race, and I could feel no bottom." We dared not follow the banks of the subterranean river, for fear lest we should fall into it again in the darkness. So after Good had rested a while, and we had drunk our fill of the water, which was sweet and fresh, and washed our faces, that needed it sadly, as well as we could, we started from the banks of this African Styx, and began to retrace our steps along the tunnel, Good dripping unpleasantly in front of us. At length we came to another gallery leading to our right. "We may as well take it," said Sir Henry wearily. "All roads are alike here. We can only go on till we drop." Slowly, for a long, long while, we stumbled, utterly exhausted, along this new tunnel, Sir Henry now leading the way. Again I thought of abandoning that basket, but did not. Suddenly he stopped, and we bumped up against him. "Look," he whispered, "is my brain going, or is that light?" We stared with all our eyes, and there, yes, there, far ahead of us, was a faint, glimmering spot no larger than a cottage window pane. It was so faint that I doubt if any eyes, except those which, like ours, had for days seen nothing but blackness, could have perceived it at all. With a gasp of hope we pushed on. In 5 minutes there was no longer any doubt. It was a patch of faint light. A minute more, and a breath of real live air was fanning us. On we struggled. All at once the tunnel narrowed. Sir Henry went on his knees. Smaller yet it grew, till it was only the size of a large fox's earth. It was earth now, mind you, the rock had ceased. A squeeze, a struggle, and Sir Henry was out, and so was Good, and so was I, dragging Foulata's basket after me. And there above us were the blessed stars, and in our nostrils was the sweet air. Then suddenly something gave, and we were all rolling over and over and over through grass and bushes and soft wet soil. The basket caught in something, and I stopped. Sitting up, I hallooed lustily. An answering shout came from below, where Sir Henry's wild career had been checked by some level ground. I scrambled to him and found him unhurt, though breathless. Then we looked for Good. A little way off we discovered him also, hammed in a forked root. He was a good deal knocked about, but soon came to himself. We sat down together there on the grass, and the revulsion of feeling was so great that really I think we cried with joy. We had escaped from that awful dungeon, which was so near to becoming our grave. Surely some merciful power guided our footsteps to the jackal hole, for that is what it must have been, at the termination of the tunnel. And see, yonder on the mountains, the dawn we had never thought to look upon again was blushing rosy red. Presently the grey light stole down the slopes, and we saw that we were at the bottom, or rather nearly at the bottom, of the vast pit in front of the entrance to the cave. Now we could make out the dim forms of the three colossi who sat upon its verge. Doubtless those awful passages, along which we had wandered the livelong night, had been originally in some way connected with the great diamond mine. As for the subterranean river in the bowels of the mountain, heaven only knows what it is, or whence it flows, or whither it goes. I, for one, have no anxiety to trace its course. Lighter it grew, and lighter yet. We could see each other now, and such a spectacle as we presented I have never set eyes upon before or since. Gaunt-cheeked, hollow-eyed wretches, smeared all over with dust and mud, bruised, bleeding, the long fear of imminent death yet written on our countenances, we were indeed a sight to frighten the daylight. And yet it is a solemn fact that Good's eyeglass was still fixed in Good's eye. I doubt whether he had taken it out at all. Neither the darkness, nor the plunge in the subterranean river, nor the roll down the slope, had been able to separate Good and his eyeglass. Presently we rose, feeling that our limbs would stiffen if we stopped there long, and commenced with slow and painful steps to struggle up the sloping sides of the great pit. For an hour or more we toiled steadfastly up the blue clay, dragging ourselves on by the help of the roots and grasses with which it was closed. But now I had no more thought of leaving the basket. Indeed, nothing but death should have parted us. At last it was done, and we stood by the great road on that side of the pit which is opposite to the colossi. At the side of the road, 100 yards off, a fire was burning in front of some huts, and round the fire were figures. We staggered towards them, supporting one another, and halting every few paces. Presently one of the figures rose, saw us, and fell onto the ground, crying out for fear. "Infadoos! Infadoos! It is we, thy friends!" He rose. He ran to us, staring wildly, and still shaking with fear. "Oh, my lords, it is you indeed. You come back from the dead, come back from the dead." And the old warrior flung himself down before us, and clasping Sir Henry's knees, he wept aloud for joy. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. Ignosi's farewell. 10 days from that eventful morning found us once more in our old quarters at Loo, and strange to say, but little the worse for our terrible experience, except that my stubby hair came out of the treasure cave about 3 shades greyer than it went in, and that Good never was quite the same after Foulata's death, which seemed to move him very greatly. I am bound to say, looking at the thing from the point of view of an oldish man of the world, that I consider her removal was a fortunate occurrence, since otherwise complications would have been sure to ensue. The poor creature was no ordinary native girl, but a person of great, I had almost said stately, beauty, and of considerable refinement of mind. But no amount of beauty or refinement could have made an entanglement between Good and herself a desirable occurrence, for, as she herself put it, can the sun mate with the darkness, or the white with the black. I need hardly state that we never again penetrated into Solomon's treasure chamber. After we had recovered from our fatigue, a process which took us 48 hours, we descended into the great pit in the hope of finding the hole by which we had crept out of the mountain, but with no success. To begin with, rain had fallen and obliterated our spoor, and what is more, the sides of the vast pit were full of ant-bear and other holes. It was impossible to say to which of these we owed our salvation. Also, on the day before we started back to Loo, we made a further examination of the wonders of the stalactite cave, and drawn by a kind of restless feeling, even penetrated once more into the chamber of the dead. Passing beneath the spear of the White Death, we gazed, with sensations which it would be quite impossible for me to describe, at the mass of rock that had shut us off from escape, thinking the while of priceless treasures beyond, of the mysterious old hag whose flattened fragments lay crushed beneath it, and of the fair girl of whose tomb it was the portal. I say gazed at the rock, for examine as we could find no traces of the join of the sliding door, nor indeed could we hit upon the secret, now utterly lost, that worked it, though we tried for an hour or more. It is certainly a marvellous bit of mechanism, characteristic in its massive and yet inscrutable simplicity of the age which produced it, and I doubt if the world has such another to show. At last we gave it up in disgust, though if the mass had suddenly risen before our eyes, I doubt if we should have screwed up courage to step over Gagool's mangled remains and once more enter the treasure chamber, even in the sure and certain hope of unlimited diamonds. And yet I could have cried at the idea of leaving all that treasure, the biggest treasure probably that in the world's history has ever been accumulated in one spot. But there was no help for it, only dynamite could force its way through 5 feet of solid rock. So we left it. Perhaps in some remote unborn century a more fortunate explorer may hit upon the open sesame and flood the world with gems. But myself, I doubt it. Somehow I seem to feel that the tens of millions of pounds worth of jewels which lie in the 3 stone coffers will never shine round the neck of an earthly beauty. They and Foulata's bones will keep cold company till the end of all things. With a sigh of disappointment we made our way back, and next day started for Loo. And yet it was really very ungrateful of us to be disappointed, for as the reader will remember, by a lucky thought I had taken the precaution to fill the wide pockets of my old shooting coat and trousers with gems before we left our prison house, also Foulata's basket, which held twice as many more, notwithstanding that the water bottle had occupied some of its space. A good many of these fell out in the course of our roll down the side of the pit, including several of the big ones, which I had crammed in on the top in my coat pockets. But comparatively speaking, an enormous quantity still remained, including 93 large stones, ranging from over 200 to 70 carats in weight. My old shooting coat and the basket still held sufficient treasure to make us all, if not millionaires, as the term is understood in America, at least exceedingly wealthy men, and yet to keep enough stones each to make the 3 finest sets of gems in Europe. So we had not done so badly. On arriving at Loo, we were most cordially received by Ignosi, whom we found well, and busily engaged in consolidating his power, and reorganizing the regiments which had suffered most in the great struggle with Twala. He listened with intense interest to our wonderful story, but when we told him of old Gagool's frightful end, he grew thoughtful. "Come hither," he called to a very old Induna, or councillor, who was sitting with others in a circle round the king, but out of earshot. The ancient man rose, approached, saluted, and seated himself. "Thou art aged," said Ignosi. "Ay, my lord the king. Thy father's father and I were born on the same day." "Tell me, when thou wast little, did thou knowest Gagool the witch doctress?" "Ay, my lord the king." "How was she then? Young like thee?" "Not so, my lord the king. She was even as she is now, as she was in the days of my great-grandfather before me, old and dried, very ugly, and full of wickedness." "She is no more. She is dead." "So, O king, then is an ancient curse taken from the land. Go." "Koom, I go, black puppy, who tore out the old dog's throat. Koom." "Ye see, my brothers," said Ignosi, "this was a strange woman, and I rejoice that she is dead. She would have let you die in the dark place, and mayhap afterwards she had found a way to slay me, as she found a way to slay my father, and set up Twala, whom her black heart loved, in his place. Now go on with the tale. Surely there never was its like." After I had narrated all the story of our escape, as we had agreed between ourselves that I should, I took the opportunity to address Ignosi as to our departure from Kukuanaland. "And now, Ignosi," I said, "the time has come for us to bid thee farewell, and start to see our own land once more. Behold, Ignosi, thou camest with us a servant, and now we leave thee a mighty king. If thou art grateful to us, remember to do even as thou didst promise, to rule justly, to respect the law, and to put none to death without a cause. So shalt thou prosper. Tomorrow, at the break of day, Ignosi, thou wilt give us an escort who shall lead us across the mountains. Is it not so, O king?" Ignosi covered his face with his hands for a while before answering. "My heart is sore," he said at last. "Your words split my heart in twain. What have I done to you, Incubu, Macumazahn, and Bougwan, that ye should leave me desolate? Ye who stood by me in rebellion and in battle, will ye leave me in the day of peace and victory? What will ye, wives? Choose from among the maidens. A place to live in? Behold, the land is yours as far as ye can see. The white men's houses? Ye shall teach my people how to build them. Cattle for beef and milk? Every married man shall bring you an ox or a cow. Wild game to hunt? Does not the elephant walk through my forests, and the river horse sleep in the reeds? Would ye make war? My impis wait your word. If there is anything more which I can give, that will I give you." "Nay, Ignosi, we want none of these things," I answered. "We would seek our own place." "Now do I learn," said Ignosi bitterly and with flashing eyes, "that ye love the bright stones more than me, your friend. Ye have the stones, now ye would go to Natal and across the moving black water and sell them, and be rich, as it is the desire of a white man's heart to be. Cursed for your sake be the white stones, and cursed he who seeks them. Death shall it be to him who sets foot in the place of death to find them. I have spoken. White men, ye can go. I laid my hand upon his arm. Ignosi, I said, tell us, when thou didst wander in Zululand and among the white people of Natal, did not thine heart turn to the land thy mother told thee of, thy native place, where thou didst see the light, and play when thou wast little, the land where thy place was? It was even so, Macumazahn. In like manner, Ignosi, do our hearts turn to our land and to our own place. Then came a silence. When Ignosi broke it, it was in a different voice. I do perceive that now as ever thy words are wise and full of reason, Macumazahn. That which flies in the air loves not to run along the ground. The white man loves not to live on the level of the black, or to house among his kraals. Well, ye must go, and leave my heart sore, because ye will be as dead to me, since from where ye are no tidings can come to me. But listen, and let all your brothers know my words. No other white man shall cross the mountains, even if any man live to come so far. I will see no traders with their guns and gin. My people shall fight with the spear and drink water like their forefathers before them. I will have no praying men to put a fear of death into men's hearts, to stir them up against the law of the king, and make a path for the white folk who follow to run on. If a white man comes to my gates, I will send him back. If 100 come, I will push them back. If armies come, I will make war on them with all my strength, and they shall not prevail against me. None shall ever seek for the shining stones, no, not an army. For if they come, I will send a regiment and fill up the pit, and break down the white columns in the caves, and choke them with rocks, so that none can reach even to that door of which ye speak, and whereof the way to move it is lost. But for you three, Incubu, Macumazahn, and Bougwan, the path is always open, for behold, ye are nearer to me than aught that breathes, and ye would go. Infadoos, my uncle, and my Unduna shall take you by the hand and guide you with a regiment. There is, as I have learned, another way across the mountains that he shall show you. Farewell, my brothers, brave white men. See me no more, for I have no heart to bear it. Behold, I make a decree, and it shall be published from the mountains to the mountains. Your names, Incubu, Macumazahn, and Bougwan, shall be Hlonipa, even as the names of dead kings, and he who speaks them shall die. So shall your memory be preserved in the land for ever. Note: this extraordinary and negative way of showing intense respect is by no means unknown among African people, and the result is that if, as is usual, the name in question has a significance, the meaning must be expressed by an idiom or other word. In this way a memory is preserved for generations, or until the new word utterly supplants the old. Go now, ere my eyes rain tears like a woman's. At times, as you look back down the path of life, or when ye are old and gather yourselves together to crouch before the fire, because for you the sun has no more heat, Ye will think of how we stood shoulder to shoulder in that great battle which thy wise words planned, Macumazahn; of how thou wast the point of the horn that galled Twala's flank, Bougwan, whilst thou stood in the ring of the Greys, Incubu, and men went down before thine axe like corn before a sickle. Ay, and of how thou didst break that wild bull Twala's strength, and bring his pride to dust. Fare ye well for ever, Incubu, Macumazahn, and Bougwan, my lords and my friends." Ignosi rose and looked earnestly at us for a few seconds. Then he threw the corner of his kaross over his head, so as to cover his face from us. We went in silence. Next day at dawn we left Loo, escorted by our old friend Infadoos, who was heartbroken at our departure, and by the regiment of buffaloes. Early as was the hour, all the main street of the town was lined with multitudes of people, who gave us the royal salute as we passed at the head of the regiment, while the women blessed us for having rid the land of Twala, throwing flowers before us as we went. It was really very affecting, and not the sort of thing one is accustomed to meet with from natives. One ludicrous incident occurred, however, which I rather welcomed, as it gave us something to laugh at. Just before we reached the confines of the town, a pretty young girl, with some lovely lilies in her hand, ran forward and presented them to Good. Somehow they all seemed to like Good. I think his eyeglass and solitary whisker gave him a fictitious value, and then said that she had a boon to ask. "Speak on," he answered. "Let my lord show his servant his beautiful white legs, that his servant may look upon them, and remember them all her days, and tell of them to her children. His servant has travelled 4 days' journey to see them, for the fame of them has gone throughout the land." "I'll be hanged if I do!" exclaimed Good excitedly. "Come, come, my dear fellow," said Sir Henry, "you can't refuse to oblige a lady." "I won't," replied Good obstinately. "It is positively indecent." However, in the end he consented to draw up his trousers to the knee, amid notes of rapturous admiration from all the women present, especially the gratified young lady, and in this guise he had to walk till we got clear of the town. Good's legs, I fear, will never be so greatly admired again. Of his melting teeth, and even of his transparent eye, the Kukuanas wearied more or less, but of his legs, never. As we travelled, Infadoos told us that there was another pass over the mountains to the north of the one followed by Solomon's Great Road, or rather that there was a place where it was possible to climb down the wall of cliff which separates Kukuanaland from the desert, and is broken by the towering shapes of Sheba's Breasts. It appeared also that rather more than 2 years previously a party of Kukuana hunters had descended this path into the desert in search of ostriches, whose plumes are much prized among them for war head-dresses, and that in the course of their hunt they had been led far from the mountains and were much troubled by thirst. Seeing trees on the horizon, however, they walked towards them, and discovered a large and fertile oasis some miles in extent, and plentifully watered. It was by way of this oasis that Infadoos suggested we should return, and the idea seemed to us a good one, for it appeared that we should thus escape the rigours of the mountain pass. Also some of the hunters were in attendance to guide us to the oasis, from which they stated they could perceive other fertile spots far away in the desert. Note: it often puzzled all of us to understand how it was possible that Ignosi's mother, bearing the child with her, should have survived the dangers of her journey across the mountains and the desert, dangers which so nearly proved fatal to ourselves. It has since occurred to me, and I give the idea to the reader for what it is worth, that she must have taken this second route and wandered out like Haggard into the wilderness. If she did so, there is no longer anything inexplicable about the story, since, as Ignosi himself related, she may well have been picked up by some ostrich hunters before she or the child was exhausted, was led by them to the oasis, and thence by stages to the fertile country, and so on by slow degrees southwards to Zululand. Allan Quatermain. Travelling easily, on the night of the fourth day's journey we found ourselves once more on the crest of the mountains that separate Kukuanaland from the desert, which rolled away in sandy billows at our feet, and about 25 miles to the north of Sheba's Breasts. At dawn on the following day we were led to the edge of a very precipitous chasm, by which we were to descend the precipice and gain the plain 2,000 and more feet below. Here we bade farewell to that true friend and sturdy old warrior, Infadoos, who solemnly wished all good upon us, and nearly wept with grief. "Never, my lords," he said, "shall mine own eyes see the like of you again. Ah, the way that Incubu cut his men down in the battle! Ah, for the sight of that stroke with which he swept off my brother Twala's head! It was beautiful, beautiful! I may never hope to see such another, except perchance in happy dreams." We were very sorry to part from him. Indeed, Good was so moved that he gave him as a souvenir, what do you think? An eyeglass. Afterwards we discovered that it was a spare one. Infadoos was delighted, foreseeing that the possession of such an article would increase his prestige enormously, and after several vain attempts he actually succeeded in screwing it into his own eye. Anything more incongruous than the old warrior looked with an eyeglass I never saw. Eyeglasses do not go well with leopard skin cloaks and black ostrich plumes. Then, after seeing that our guides were well laden with water and provisions, and having received a thundering farewell salute from the Buffaloes, we wrung Infadoos by the hand and began our downward climb. A very arduous business it proved to be, but somehow that evening we found ourselves at the bottom without accident. "Do you know," said Sir Henry that night, as we sat by our fire and gazed up at the beetling cliffs above us, "I think that there are worse places than Kukuanaland in the world, and that I have known unhappier times than the last month or two, though I have never spent such queer ones. Eh, you fellows?" "I almost wish I were black," said Good with a sigh. As for myself, I reflected that all's well that ends well, but in the course of a long life of shaves I never had such shaves as those which I recently experienced. The thought of that battle makes me feel cold all over, and as for our experience in the treasure chamber. Next morning we started on a toilsome trudge across the desert, having with us a good supply of water carried by our 5 guides, and camped that night in the open, marching again at dawn on the morrow. By noon of the third day's journey we could see the trees of the oasis of which the guide spoke, and within an hour of sundown we were walking once more upon grass and listening to the sound of running water. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. Found. And now I come to perhaps the strangest adventure that happened to us in all this strange business, and one which shows how wonderfully things are brought about. I was walking along quietly, some way in front of the other two, down the banks of the stream which runs from the oasis till it is swallowed up in the hungry desert sands, when suddenly I stopped and rubbed my eyes, as well I might. There, not 20 yards in front of me, placed in a charming situation under the shade of a species of fig tree, and facing to the stream, was a cosy hut, built more or less on the Kaffir principle, with grass and withes, but having a full-length door instead of a bee-hole. "What the dickens," said I to myself, "can a hut be doing out here?" Even as I said it, the door of the hut opened, and there limped out of it a white man clothed in skins, and with an enormous black beard. I thought that I must have got a touch of the sun. It was impossible. No hunter ever came to such a place as this. Certainly no hunter would ever settle in it. I stared, and so did the other man, and just at that juncture Sir Henry and Good walked up. "Look here, you fellows," I said, "is that a white man, or am I mad?" Sir Henry looked, and Good looked, and then all of a sudden the lame white man with the black beard uttered a great cry and began hobbling towards us. When he was close he fell down in a sort of faint. With a spring Sir Henry was by his side. "Great powers!" he cried, "it is my brother George!" At the sound of this disturbance another figure, also clad in skins, emerged from the hut, a gun in his hand, and ran towards us. On seeing me he too gave a cry. "Macumazahn!" he holloed. "Don't you know me, boss? I'm Jim the Hunter. I lost the note you gave me to give to the boss, and we have been here nearly 2 years." And the fellow fell at my feet and rolled over and over, weeping for joy. "You careless scoundrel," I said, "you ought to be well sjambocked," that is, hided. Meanwhile the man with the black beard had recovered and risen, and he and Sir Henry were pump-handing away at each other, apparently without a word to say. But whatever they had quarrelled about in the past, I suspect it was a lady, though I never asked, it was evidently forgotten now. "My dear old fellow," burst out Sir Henry at last, "I thought you were dead. I have been over Solomon's Mountains to find you. I had given up all hope of ever seeing you again, and now I come across you perched in the desert, like an old aasvogel (vulture). "I tried to cross Solomon's Mountains nearly 2 years ago," was the answer, spoken in the hesitating voice of a man who has had little recent opportunity of using his tongue. "But when I reached here a boulder fell on my leg and crushed it, and I have been able to go neither forward nor back. Then I came up. 'How do you do, Mr. Neville?' I said. 'Do you remember me?' 'Why,' he said, 'isn't it Hunter Quatermain, eh? And Good too. Hold on a minute, you fellows, I'm getting dizzy again. It is all so very strange, and when a man has ceased to hope, so very happy.' That evening, over the campfire, George Curtis told us his story, which in its way was almost as eventful as our own, and put shortly amounted to this. A little less than 2 years before, he had started from Sitanda's Kraal to try and reach Suliman's Berg. As for the note I had sent him by Jim, that worthy lost it, and he had never heard of it till to-day. But acting upon information he had received from the natives, he headed not for Sheba's Breasts, but for the ladder-like descent of the mountains down which we had just come, which is clearly a better route than that marked out in old Dom Silvestra's plan. In the desert he and Jim had suffered great hardships, but finally they reached this oasis, where a terrible accident befell George Curtis. On the day of their arrival he was sitting by the stream, and Jim was extracting the honey from the nest of a stingless bee which is to be found in the desert, on the top of a bank immediately above him. In so doing he loosened a great boulder of rock, which fell upon George Curtis's right leg, crushing it frightfully. From that day he had been so lame that he found it impossible to go either forward or back, and had preferred to take the chance of dying in the oasis to the certainty of perishing in the desert. As for food, however, they got on pretty well, for they had a good supply of ammunition, and the oasis was frequented, especially at night, by large quantities of game, which came thither for water. These they shot, or trapped in pitfalls, using the flesh for food, and after their clothes wore out, the hides for clothing. And so, George Curtis ended, we have lived for nearly 2 years like a second Robinson Crusoe and his man Friday, hoping against hope that some natives might come here to help us away, but none have come. Only last night we settled that Jim should leave me and try to reach Sitanda's Kraal to get assistance. He was to go tomorrow, but I had little hope of ever seeing him back again. And now you, of all people in the world, you, who, as I fancied, had long ago forgotten all about me, and were living comfortably in old England, turn up in a promiscuous way and find me where you least expected. It is the most wonderful thing that I have ever heard of, and the most merciful too. Then Sir Henry set to work and told him the main facts of our adventures, sitting till late into the night to do it. "By Jove," said George Curtis, when I showed him some of the diamonds. "Well, at least you have got something for your pains besides my worthless self." Sir Henry laughed. "They belong to Quatermain, and good. It was a part of the bargain that they should divide any spoils there might be." This remark set me thinking, and having spoken to Good, I told Sir Henry that it was our joint wish that he should take a third portion of the diamonds, or if he would not, that his share should be handed to his brother, who had suffered even more than ourselves on the chance of getting them. Finally we prevailed upon him to consent to this arrangement, but George Curtis did not know of it until some time afterwards. Here at this point I think I shall end my history. Our journey across the desert back to Sitanda's Kraal was most arduous, especially as we had to support George Curtis, whose right leg was very weak indeed, and continually threw out splinters of bone. But we did accomplish it somehow, and to give its details would only be to reproduce much of what happened to us on the former occasion. 6 months from the date of our re-arrival at Sitanda's, where we found our guns and other goods quite safe, though the old rascal in charge was much disgusted at our surviving to claim them, saw us all once more safe and sound at my little place on the Berea, near Durban, where I am now writing. Thence I bid farewell to all who have accompanied me through the strangest trip I ever made in the course of a long and varied experience. P.S. Just as I had written the last word, a Kaffir came up my avenue of orange trees, carrying a letter in a cleft stick, which he had brought from the post. It turned out to be from Sir Henry, and as it speaks for itself, I give it in full. October 1, 1884, Brayley Hall, Yorkshire. My dear Quatermain, I send you a line a few mails back to say that the 3 of us, Good, George, and myself, fetched up all right in England. We got off the boat at Southampton and went up to town. You should have seen what a swell Good turned out to be the very next day. Beautifully shaved, frock coat fitting like a glove, brand new eyeglass, etc., etc. I went and walked in the park with him, where I met some people I know, and at once told him the story of his beautiful white legs. He is furious, especially as some ill-natured person has printed it in a society paper. To come to business, Good and I took the diamonds to Streeter's, to be valued as we arranged, and really I am afraid to tell you what they put them at, it seems so enormous. They say that of course it is more or less guesswork, as such stones have never to their knowledge been put on the market in anything like such quantities. It appears that with the exception of one or two of the largest, they are of the finest water, and equal in every way to the best Brazilian stones. I asked them if they would buy them, but they said it was beyond their power to do so, and recommended us to sell by degrees, over a period of years indeed, for fear lest we should flood the market. They offer, however, 180,000 for a very small portion of them. You must come home, Quatermain, and see about these things, especially if you insist upon making the magnificent present of the third share, which does not belong to me, to my brother George. As for Good, he is no good. His time is too much occupied in shaving, and other matters connected with the vain adorning of the body. But I think he is still down on his luck about Foulata. He told me that since he had been home he hadn't seen a woman to touch her, either as regards her figure or the sweetness of her expression. I want you to come home, my dear old comrade, and to buy a house near here. You have done your day's work, and have lots of money now, and there is a place for sale quite close which would suit you admirably. Do come, the sooner the better. You can finish writing the story of our adventures on board ship. We have refused to tell the tale till it is written by you, for fear lest we shall not be believed. If you start on receipt of this, you will reach here by Christmas, and I book you to stay with me for that. Good is coming, and George, and so, by the way, is your boy Harry. There's a bribe for you. I have had him down for a week's shooting, and like him. He's a cool young hand. He shot me in the leg, cut out the pellets, and then remarked upon the advantages of having a medical student with every shooting party. Good-bye, old boy. I can't say any more, but I know that you will come, if it is only to oblige your sincerest friend, Henry Curtis. P.S. The tusks of the great bull that killed poor Kiva have now been put up in the hall here, over the pair of buffalo horns you gave me, and look magnificent. And the axe with which I chopped off Twala's head is fixed above my writing table. I wish that we could have managed to bring away the coats of chain armour. Don't lose poor Foulata's basket in which you brought away the diamonds. H.C. Today is Tuesday. There is a steamer going on Friday, and I really think that I must take Curtis at his word, and sail by her for England, if it is only to see you, Harry, my boy, and to look after the printing of this history, which is a task that I do not like to trust to anybody else. Allan Quatermain. The End.